The moment Michael heard his daughter's first cry, he didn't know it would be the last sound she'd ever make. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital buzzed overhead as the nurse placed the tiny, wrinkled newborn into his trembling arms. His wife, Sarah, lay pale and exhausted on the bed, her breathing finally steadying after 18 grueling hours of labor. Emma, they'd already chosen the name, had her mother's delicate features and her father's dark hair. She was perfect. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. Michael pressed his lips to Emma's tiny forehead, inhaling that indescribable newborn smell, a mix of innocence and promise. In that sterile hospital room, with the October rain tapping against the windows, he made a silent vow. "I will give you everything. I will protect you from every harm this world can throw at you." He had no idea how hollow that promise would soon become. The first 6 months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and coffee-stained mornings. Michael, a senior financial analyst at Mercer & Associates, juggled conference calls with diaper changes, quarterly reports with midnight feedings. Sarah had taken maternity leave from her teaching position, and their modest 2-story home in Riverside Meadows, a quiet suburb 30 minutes outside Philadelphia, became their entire universe. But something was wrong. It started subtly. Emma didn't startle when the blender roared to life in the kitchen. She didn't turn her head when Michael called her name from across the room. When the neighbor's dog barked frantically at the mailman, Emma continued playing with her stuffed rabbit, completely oblivious to the chaos just feet away. "Maybe she's just a calm baby," Sarah said one evening, though Michael could hear the uncertainty creeping into her voice. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, clapping her hands inches from Emma's face. The baby didn't blink. "Sarah," Michael's throat tightened. "It's nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "Babies develop at different rates. My sister's son didn't respond to sounds until he was almost 8 months old, and now he won't stop talking." But Michael had already pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "Baby not responding to sounds, 6 months." The search results made his stomach drop. Words like hearing loss and auditory processing disorder stared back at him from the glowing screen. 2 weeks later, they sat in Dr. Patricia Hernandez's office at the Philadelphia Children's Audiology Center. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, decorated with cartoon animals wearing tiny headphones. Emma sat in Sarah's lap, contentedly chewing on her fist, unaware that her entire future hung in the balance of whatever the doctor was about to say. Dr. Hernandez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, reviewed the results of the hearing test they'd conducted that morning. The silence in the room was suffocating. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson," she began, her voice gentle but professional, "the tests confirm what we suspected. Emma has profound bilateral sensorineural hearing loss." "What does that mean?" Sarah's voice cracked. Her hand instinctively moved to Emma's back, rubbing small circles as if she could somehow protect her daughter from the diagnosis that had just shattered their world. "It means Emma was born deaf," Dr. Hernandez explained. "Both ears are affected, and the damage is to the inner ear, specifically the cochlea and the auditory nerve. She cannot hear any sounds, even at the loudest volumes." Michael felt the room tilt. He gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles turning white. But she cried when she was born. We heard her." "Yes. Vocalization doesn't require hearing," the doctor said softly. "Many deaf infants cry and make sounds, but as they grow, without auditory feedback, those vocalizations often diminish." Sarah was crying now, quiet sobs that shook her shoulders. Michael wanted to comfort her, but he couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His beautiful daughter, his perfect, innocent Emma, would never hear his voice tell her he loved her. She'd never hear music or laughter or the sound of rain on the roof. She'd never hear her own name. "There are options," Dr. Hernandez continued, sliding a folder across her desk. Cochlear implants, American Sign Language, speech therapy. Emma can live a full, rich life. But I won't lie to you. It will be challenging. It will require dedication, resources, and time. Resources. Time. Michael thought of his demanding job, the mortgage on their house, Sarah's modest teacher's salary. They had decent insurance, but he'd heard horror stories about what insurance companies considered medically necessary versus elective. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep in her crib, Michael and Sarah sat at their kitchen table surrounded by pamphlets and printouts. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across their exhausted faces. Cochlear implants can cost up to $50,000 per ear, Sarah read aloud, her finger tracing the text. Insurance covers some of it, but we'd still be looking at $10,000 to $15,000 out of pocket, plus ongoing therapy, maintenance, replacements as she grows. Michael ran his hands through his hair. We'll make it work. We'll take out a loan if we have to. She's our daughter. I know, Sarah whispered. I had so many plans for her, Michael. Piano lessons, bedtime stories, singing lullabies. We'll adapt, Michael said, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Sarah or himself. People do it every day. We're not the first parents to face this. But beneath his determined words, fear gnawed at him. Fear of the unknown, fear of failing Emma, fear of watching his daughter struggle in a world that wasn't designed for her. The next 18 months were the hardest of Michael's life. They started with sign language classes, both of them attending twice a week at the community center, learning to communicate with their daughter through gestures and expressions. Michael's fingers fumbled through the alphabet, struggling to make the shapes feel natural. Sarah picked it up faster, her teacher's instincts adapting quickly to this new language. Emma, oblivious to her parents' struggles, was a happy toddler. She learned to walk at 13 months, stumbling across the living room into Michael's waiting arms. She loved books, though she couldn't hear the stories her parents read. Instead, they learned to sign the words, their hands dancing above the colorful pages. Money became a constant source of stress. Michael took on extra projects at work, staying late into the evening, his office overlooking the glittering lights of downtown Philadelphia. Sarah returned to teaching part-time, and they hired Mrs. Chen, a retired nurse from down the street, to watch Emma during the day. They were approved for cochlear implant surgery when Emma turned 2. The day they got the call from the insurance company, Sarah collapsed onto the couch in relief, tears streaming down her face. "We can do this," she said, clutching the approval letter. "Our baby is going to hear." But life had other plans. 3 weeks before Emma's scheduled surgery, Sarah complained of a headache during dinner. Michael was clearing the table when he heard a crash behind him. He spun around to find his wife collapsed on the kitchen floor, her body convulsing, foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. "Sarah, Sarah!" He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he fumbled for his phone. Emma, strapped in her high chair, watched with wide, confused eyes as paramedics rushed into their home 15 minutes later. The diagnosis came fast and brutal: stage 4 glioblastoma, an aggressive brain tumor that had been silently growing for months, maybe years. The headaches Sarah had dismissed as stress, the occasional dizziness she'd attributed to lack of sleep, all signs of something sinister taking root in her brain. "How long?" Michael asked the oncologist, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked too young to be delivering death sentences. 6 months, maybe a year with aggressive treatment, Dr. Morrison said. "I'm sorry." Sarah fought. God, how she fought. Through chemotherapy that left her weak and hollow-eyed, through radiation that burned her scalp and stole her beautiful auburn hair, through countless hospital stays while Michael juggled work, Emma's care, and his own crumbling sanity. Emma's cochlear implant surgery was postponed indefinitely. There simply wasn't enough. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough of Michael to go around. Sarah died on a Tuesday morning in March, with snow falling gently outside the hospice window. Michael held her hand as her breathing slowed, then stopped. Emma, barely 3 years old, sat in her grandmother's lap across the room, signing "Mama" over and over, not understanding why her mother wouldn't respond. At the funeral, Michael stood at the graveside in his black suit, holding Emma's tiny hand. The minister's words washed over him like meaningless noise. Friends and family offered condolences, their mouths moving, but Michael couldn't hear them. The world had become as silent for him as it was for his daughter. That night, alone in the house that still smelled like Sarah's lavender lotion, Michael made a decision. He couldn't fall apart. He didn't have that luxury. Emma needed him, completely, totally, desperately needed him. He was all she had left. He would be enough. He had to be. 5 years later, Michael Patterson had become a master of routine, because routine was the only thing keeping him from drowning. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., his alarm pierced the darkness of his bedroom. He'd shuffle to the bathroom, splash cold water on his face, and stare at the stranger in the mirror, a man with premature grey at his temples and permanent shadows under his eyes. At 38, he looked 50. By 6:45, he'd wake Emma. She slept in the room that used to be Sarah's craft studio, the walls now covered with colourful alphabet posters and visual schedules. Michael would flip her bedroom light on and off 3 times, their signal, and watch as his 8-year-old daughter stretched and smiled, her dark hair a tangled mess against the pillow. "Good morning, sunshine," he'd sign, his fingers forming the words with practiced ease. Emma would sign back, "Good morning, Daddy," and his heart would break and heal simultaneously, the way it did every single day. Breakfast was always the same: scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. Emma needed consistency, structure. So did Michael, if he was honest with himself. After Sarah died, chaos had threatened to consume them both. Routine became their life raft. At 7:30, they'd walk the 4 blocks to Riverside Elementary School. Emma attended the school's deaf and hard of hearing program, one of the few in the area. She had an interpreter, Mrs. Rodriguez, who translated the teacher's lessons into American Sign Language. Emma was thriving academically, top of her class in reading and math, but socially she struggled. The hearing kids didn't know how to interact with her. The few other deaf students were older, already formed into their own tight-knit group. Michael would watch through the classroom window as Emma sat alone during free time, colouring while the other children played together, their laughter a sound she'd never hear. It gutted him every single time. "She's doing fine, Mrs." Rodriguez would assure him, noticing his concerned expression. "She's resilient, Mr. Patterson. Kids adapt." But Michael wondered if adapting was just another word for giving up. Work had become mechanical. Michael still worked at Mercer and Associates, but his ambitions had died with Sarah. He'd turned down 2 promotions because they required travel. He arrived exactly at 9 a.m. and left exactly at 5 p.m. His colleagues had stopped inviting him to happy hours years ago. "You used to be fun," his old friend Derek had said once, half joking over lunch. "Remember when you'd actually laugh?" Michael had just smiled politely and changed the subject. Fun felt like a betrayal to Sarah's memory. Laughter felt impossible when every night he went home to a silent house, to a daughter who would never hear his voice crack when he read her bedtime stories about princesses and dragons. The cochlear implants remained out of reach. Between Sarah's medical bills, insurance had covered most, but not all, and the ongoing costs of Emma's education, therapy, and daily needs, Michael's savings had evaporated. He'd done the math 100 times. At his current rate of saving, Emma would be 16 before they could afford the surgery. 16. By then, the window of optimal language development would have long closed. He'd applied for grants, reached out to charitable organizations, even started a GoFundMe page that raised a heartbreaking $3,000 before stalling completely. Strangers' sympathy only went so far, so Michael stopped hoping. Hope was expensive. Hope hurt too much. It was a Thursday in late September when everything changed. Michael had taken the afternoon off, something he rarely did, because Emma's school was hosting a fall festival. He'd promised her weeks ago that he'd be there, and he never broke promises to Emma, not after breaking the biggest promise of all, that her mother would always be there. The festival was held on the school's front lawn, a sprawling green space dotted with booths, offering face painting, balloon animals, and bobbing for apples. The air smelled like cinnamon donuts and fresh-cut grass. The October sun hung low in the sky, casting everything in that golden, nostalgic light that made Michael ache for autumn's past. Emma tugged on his hand, pointing excitedly at the pumpkin decorating station. She'd worn her favorite green dress, the one with the pockets she filled with rocks and leaves and other treasures, and her hair was pulled back with a sunflower clip. "Can we paint a pumpkin?" she signed, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Of course," Michael signed back, allowing himself to be pulled toward the booth. They spent 20 minutes turning an orange pumpkin into a lopsided but enthusiastic jack-o'-lantern. Emma's small hands were covered in black paint by the time they finished, and her smile was brighter than any Michael had seen in months. "I love it," she signed. "Can we take it home?" "Absolutely." As they walked back toward the main festival area, Michael noticed the other parents, the ones who existed in pairs, whose lives hadn't been cleaved in half by tragedy. A mother laughed as her son smeared chocolate on his face. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders, and she squealed with delight. Everywhere, children were running, shouting, living in a world of sound that Emma would never access. Michael's chest tightened. He forced himself to look away, to focus on Emma, on the present moment. That's when he saw her. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing at the edge of the festival grounds near the chain-link fence that separated the school from the residential street beyond. She was black, with her hair in elaborate box braids that fell past her shoulders. She wore a red dress that had seen better days, faded, slightly too small, with a small tear at the hem. Her feet were in worn sneakers, no socks. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder, bulging with what Michael assumed were her worldly possessions, but it was her eyes that caught him, large, dark, and filled with an intensity that seemed far too old for her young face. She was watching the festival with a mixture of longing and resignation, like someone looking through a window at a life they'd never be allowed to enter. A homeless kid. Michael's stomach twisted with sympathy, but also with the helpless guilt of someone who had their own struggles and couldn't afford to take on anyone else's. Emma had noticed the girl too. She stopped walking, her head tilted in that curious way she had when something captured her attention. The girl's eyes met Emma's across the distance. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Two children from completely different worlds, connected by something Michael couldn't quite name. Then Emma did something that shocked Michael. She raised her hand and waved. The girl hesitated, then waved back. A small, tentative smile crossed her face. "Daddy," Emma signed, tugging on Michael's sleeve. "Can I go say hello?" Michael's protective instincts flared immediately. "I don't think—" But Emma was already walking toward the fence, her jack-o'-lantern pumpkin clutched in both hands. Michael hurried after her, his heart rate accelerating. He didn't know anything about this girl. She could be dangerous. She could be— Emma reached the fence and set her pumpkin on the ground. Through the chain link she signed, "Hi, my name is Emma." The girl stared at Emma's moving hands, her expression shifting from confusion to something like recognition. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her own hands. "Hi," she signed back, the movements slightly clumsy but unmistakable. "My name is Zara." Michael froze. This homeless girl, this stranger, knew sign language. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You can sign a little," Zara signed. "I'm not very good." "Where did you learn?" Emma asked, her hands flying with excitement. Zara's expression clouded. "My little brother. He was deaf. I learned for him." "Was," Emma signed. Zara's hands dropped. She looked away, blinking rapidly. When she looked back, her eyes were wet. "He died 2 years ago." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. This girl, this child, had lost a sibling, had been caring for a deaf sibling, and now she was alone, living on the streets, wearing everything she owned on her back. Emma's face crumpled with empathy. Without hesitation, she pushed her pumpkin through the gap at the bottom of the fence. "This is for you," she signed, "so you won't be sad." Zara looked at the pumpkin, then at Emma, then at Michael. Her tough exterior cracked, and for just a moment she looked exactly like what she was, a scared, lonely kid who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "Thank you," she signed, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the pumpkin. "Do you want to come to the festival?" Emma signed. "There's donuts and face painting. Daddy will buy you some." "Emma!" Michael interjected, signing quickly. "We don't—" But he stopped himself, because he did know. He knew what it was like to be on the outside looking in. He knew what it was like to watch other people live normal lives while yours fell apart. And looking at Zara, really looking at her, he saw something in her eyes that terrified him. He saw Emma, alone, vulnerable, in need of someone to notice her, to care. "Come inside," Michael signed, his decision made before his rational mind could talk him out of it. "You can join us." Zara's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Michael confirmed, gesturing toward the school entrance. "Come around to the front gate." As Zara hurried along the fence toward the entrance, clutching her pumpkin like a lifeline, Emma looked up at her father with pure joy radiating from her face. "Thank you, Daddy," she signed. She seemed lonely. Michael swallowed hard. "Yeah, baby," she did. When Zara reached them at the gate, she stood awkwardly, clearly unused to kindness from strangers. Up close, Michael could see more details. The smudges of dirt on her face, the way her collarbones jutted out too prominently, the barely healed scrape on her elbow. This girl was surviving, but barely. "I'm Michael," he said aloud, then signed the same. "Emma's dad." "Thank you for letting me in," Zara signed. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough from disuse, with a slight accent Michael couldn't quite place. "I haven't... People don't usually..." She trailed off, but Michael understood. "People don't usually see me. People don't usually care." "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get you something to eat." Over the next hour, Michael watched something remarkable happen. Emma and Zara became instant friends. They painted faces together, Emma directing Zara to draw a butterfly on her cheek, while Zara signed stories about her brother. They shared a massive cinnamon donut, their faces covered in sugar. They bobbed for apples, and when Zara came up sputtering and laughing, it was the first time Michael had seen her look like an actual child. Other parents gave Zara sideways glances. Her disheveled appearance marked her as different, as not belonging. But Emma was oblivious to the social dynamics. She'd found someone who could communicate with her fluently, someone who understood her world, and that was all that mattered. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the festival started winding down. Parents collected their children, their arms full of carved pumpkins and bags of candy. Michael knew this moment was coming. The moment when he'd have to say goodbye to Zara and send her back to wherever she came from. But how could he do that? How could he look at this girl who'd brought more joy to Emma in one afternoon than she'd experienced in months and just let her disappear into the streets? "Zara," he signed, kneeling down to her eye level, "where are you staying tonight?" The girl's expression shuttered. "I'm fine. I have a place." "The truth, please." Zara looked away. "The underpass by the highway. There's a spot where the rain doesn't reach." Michael's heart shattered. "That's not safe." "I've been doing okay," Zara signed defensively. "I know how to take care of myself." "I'm sure you do," Michael said carefully. "But what if, just for tonight, you stayed with us? We have a guest room. You could take a shower, have a real meal, sleep in an actual bed." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "Because my daughter sees something in you," Michael signed honestly, "and because I know what it's like to feel alone." Emma, who'd been watching this exchange with desperate hope, grabbed Zara's hand. "Please stay," she signed. "Please." Zara looked between them, this kind man and his lonely daughter, and whatever walls she'd built around herself came crumbling down. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Okay," she signed, "just for tonight." But as Michael loaded both girls into his car and started the drive toward Riverside Meadows, he had a feeling that just for tonight was about to become something much more complicated. And for the first time in 5 years, that thought didn't terrify him. It gave him hope. Just for tonight became a week, then 2, then a month. Michael had called Child Protective Services that first evening, after Zara had showered and eaten her first real meal in who knew how long. He'd sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, finger hovering over the dial button, watching through the doorway as Zara and Emma played cards in the living room, their hands flying in animated sign language, both girls giggling silently. He couldn't do it. Couldn't send her back into the system that had clearly already failed her. Instead, he made calls to lawyers, social workers, anyone who could tell him how to do this right. The answer was complicated, expensive, and time-consuming, but not impossible. Zara had been in and out of foster care since her mother died of an overdose when she was 9. Her brother Marcus had died in one of those homes, a foster parent who'd refused to learn sign language, who'd isolated him, who'd treated his deafness like a burden. After Marcus died, Zara had run. She'd been on the streets for 18 months, surviving on instinct and sheer will. She's been failed by every adult who was supposed to protect her, the social worker, Mrs. Chen, had told Michael during one of many meetings. "You sure you want to take this on? You're a single father already raising a deaf daughter, adding a traumatized teenager to that mix." "I'm sure," Michael had said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Because something had shifted in his home. The silence that had felt suffocating for 5 years suddenly felt full. Zara brought life into their house. Not noise, but presence. She cooked breakfast while Michael got ready for work, her movements efficient from years of fending for herself. She walked Emma to school every morning, the two of them holding hands and signing about everything and nothing. She helped Emma with homework, her patience endless in a way that made Michael's throat tight with emotion. And Emma, God, Emma was thriving. For the first time since Sarah died, she wasn't alone. She had a sister. 3 months after Zara arrived, Michael sat in a lawyer's office in downtown Philadelphia, signing papers that would make him Zara's legal foster parent. The process had been grueling. Background checks, home visits, financial audits, but he'd done it. When he told Zara that evening, her reaction was subtle but devastating. She simply nodded, then went to her room, the guest room that was now permanently hers, decorated with posters Emma had helped her pick out. Michael found her 20 minutes later, sitting on her bed with her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her back. "It's okay," he signed when she finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. "You're safe now. You're home." "I don't know how to do this," Zara signed, her hands trembling. "I don't know how to be part of a family. I don't know how to let people care about me without waiting for them to leave." Michael's own eyes burned. "Then we'll figure it out together, because I don't know how to do this either. I don't know how to be a single dad to 2 daughters. I don't know how to fill the hole Sarah left. But we're going to try, okay? All 3 of us together." Zara threw her arms around him, and Michael held her while she cried, really cried, probably for the first time since her brother died. When Emma appeared in the doorway, confused by the emotional scene, Zara pulled her into the embrace too, and the 3 of them sat there on that bed, a makeshift family, held together by loss and love and desperate hope. The breakthrough happened on a Saturday morning in December. Snow had fallen overnight, transforming riverside meadows into a winter wonderland. Emma had pressed her face against the living room window, her breath fogging the glass, her excitement palpable. Zara sat beside her, and they were planning an elaborate snow fort, when Zara suddenly turned to Michael with an expression he'd never seen before, determined, almost fierce. "I want to show you something," she signed, "something I've been working on." Michael set down his coffee. "What is it?" "Come with me." Zara led both of them to her room. On her desk was a laptop, the old one Michael had given her for schoolwork, surrounded by printed papers covered in notes and diagrams, medical journals, research papers, YouTube video transcripts, all about cochlear implants, auditory therapy, and deaf education. "I've been researching," Zara signed, her hands moving rapidly, "about Emma's hearing, about the implants you can't afford." Michael's chest tightened. "Zara, we've been through this. The surgery costs—" "I know how much it costs," Zara interrupted. "I also know there are options you haven't tried. Clinical trials, research programs, universities that need case studies and provide treatment for free." She spread papers across the bed, pointing to highlighted sections. "Look, the University of Pennsylvania has a cochlear implant research program. They're specifically looking for children Emma's age who've never had implants. They cover the entire cost, surgery, devices, therapy, everything. In exchange, Emma participates in their long-term study on language acquisition." Michael stared at the papers, his heart hammering. "How did you find this?" "I remembered Marcus," Zara signed, her expression softening. "Before he died, his foster parents, the good ones before the bad ones, they were trying to get him into a program like this. I remembered the name of the doctor. I looked her up. She's still running the program." Michael sat down heavily on the bed, overwhelmed. "This is real. This could actually work." "I already called them," Zara signed, a small smile crossing her face. "I told them about Emma. They want to schedule a consultation next week if you're available." Emma, who'd been watching this exchange with growing excitement, grabbed Zara's arm. "Does this mean I could hear?" she signed, her hands shaking. "Maybe," Zara signed carefully. "It's not magic. It takes time and hard work, and even then, it won't be like hearing people hear. But yes, you could hear sounds, voices, music." Emma's face crumpled and she started crying, not sad tears but overwhelming joyful tears. She launched herself at Zara, hugging her with all the strength in her small body. "Thank you," Emma signed when she pulled back. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Michael couldn't speak, couldn't sign. He just pulled both girls into his arms and held them, while the winter sun streamed through the window, illuminating this impossible, beautiful moment. The consultation at UPenn went better than Michael had dared to hope. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a renowned specialist in pediatric cochlear implantation, examined Emma thoroughly and confirmed she was an ideal candidate. The surgery was scheduled for March, just 3 months away. Those 3 months passed in a blur of preparation. Emma attended pre-surgery counseling sessions to help her understand what to expect. Michael signed a mountain of paperwork. Zara researched auditory therapy techniques and made flashcards to help Emma learn to recognize sounds. The night before the surgery, Michael tucked Emma into bed and sat beside her in the darkness. Her nightlight cast soft shadows across her face. Sarah's face, he thought with a pang of grief and gratitude. "Are you scared?" he signed. Emma nodded. "A little. What if it doesn't work?" "Then we keep going," Michael signed. "We adapt, like we always have. But Emma, I need you to know something. Whether this works or not, whether you hear or not, you are perfect exactly as you are. This surgery doesn't fix you because you're not broken. It's just opening a new door, okay?" Emma smiled, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Okay, Daddy. I love you more than all the stars in the sky," Michael signed, their phrase the one Sarah used to say. "I love you more than all the fish in the ocean," Emma signed back, completing their ritual. After she fell asleep, Michael found Zara in the living room, staring out at the snowy street. She'd been quieter than usual all week, and Michael had given her space, but tonight he needed to know she was okay. "What's on your mind?" he signed, sitting beside her on the couch. Zara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally signed, her movements were slow, careful. "I keep thinking about Marcus, about how he died before he got a chance like this. And I'm so happy for Emma, but I'm also so angry that my brother never got to hear anything, never got to have a family like this. Never got to—" Her hands dropped. Michael gently took them in his. "Marcus had you," he signed. "He had a sister who loved him enough to learn an entire language for him, who remembered him years after he died, who used what she learned to help another little girl. Zara, you gave Marcus everything you could, and now you're giving Emma the same gift. Your brother would be so proud of you." Zara's tears fell silently, and Michael held her the way he'd learned to hold his daughters, with strength and tenderness, with the promise of permanence. "You're a good dad," Zara signed when she pulled back. "I never thought I'd find this. A real home. A real family." "You're stuck with us now," Michael signed with a small smile. "No returns, no exchanges." Zara laughed. Actual sound, rare and precious, and the moment felt like healing. The surgery took 6 hours. Michael paced the hospital waiting room, drinking terrible coffee and trying not to imagine everything that could go wrong. Zara sat in a plastic chair, her knee bouncing nervously, her hands clasping and unclasping in her lap. When Dr. Tanaka finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, both of them jumped to their feet. "The surgery went perfectly," she said, and Michael's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Emma will need to heal for about 4 weeks before we activate the implant. Then the real work begins. Auditory therapy, learning to interpret sounds. It's a long process, but I'm optimistic about her prognosis." 4 weeks later, they returned to UPenn for the activation appointment. Emma sat in a chair designed for children, electrodes attached to her head, the external processor of her cochlear implant fitted behind her ear. Dr. Tanaka sat at a computer, ready to activate the device that would, for the first time in Emma's life, allow sound to reach her brain. Michael held Emma's hand on one side. Zara held her other hand. The room was full of people, audiologists, researchers, speech therapists, but Michael only saw his daughter. "Ready?" Dr. Tanaka signed. Emma nodded, her face a mixture of terror and anticipation. Dr. Tanaka pressed a button. Emma's eyes went wide. Her hand squeezed Michael's so hard it hurt. Her mouth opened in shock. "What do you hear?" Dr. Tanaka asked, both speaking and signing. Emma's hands moved slowly, wonderingly. "Everything. I hear everything. The air, the lights, your voice. It's so loud. It's so much." Tears streamed down her face, overwhelmed, overstimulated, but also amazed. "Emma," Michael said. Just her name, letting his voice carry the weight of 8 years of love and grief and hope. Emma turned to him, eyes locked on his face. "Daddy," she whispered, her own voice rusty from disuse but clear. "I can hear you. I can hear your voice." Michael broke. Years of holding it together, of being strong, of carrying the weight of 2 daughters and a dead wife, and a mountain of responsibilities, it all came pouring out. He cried while his daughter heard him cry for the first time, while Zara cried beside them, while the medical staff discreetly wiped their own eyes. "I love you," Michael said, letting his voice be the first real gift he'd ever given his daughter. "I love you so much, Emma." "I love you too, Daddy," Emma said, and the words were imperfect, unpracticed, but they were the most beautiful thing Michael had ever heard. 6 months later, on a warm September afternoon, Michael stood in his backyard watching his daughters play. Emma, now 9, was chasing Zara through the grass, both of them laughing, Emma's laugh audible for the first time, high and bright and absolutely perfect. She still signed, and probably always would. Sign language was her first language, her natural language. But now she could also hear the birds singing, the wind in the trees, the sound of her father's voice saying, "I love you," every night before bed. Zara had turned 14 in August. They'd thrown her a real birthday party, her first in years, and she'd cried when Emma and Michael presented her with a cake they'd baked together, complete with 14 candles and a heartfelt, if slightly off-key, rendition of Happy Birthday. She'd officially been adopted 2 months ago. Not fostered, adopted. Zara Patterson, legally and permanently. She'd cried during the ceremony, signing "thank you" over and over until Michael pulled her into a hug and told her she never had to thank them for loving her. Now, watching his daughters play in the golden afternoon light, Michael felt Sarah's presence. Not haunting him, but surrounding him. In Emma's smile, in the courage that had allowed him to open his home to Zara, in the family they'd built from broken pieces. "We did it, Sarah," he whispered to the wind. "We're going to be okay." Emma ran up to him, breathless and glowing. "Daddy, listen!" She cupped her hands around her mouth and yelled at the top of her lungs, "I can hear my own voice." Zara jogged over, grinning. "She's been doing that all afternoon. I think the neighbors are concerned." "Let them be concerned," Michael said, pulling both girls into his arms. "Let the whole world hear her." That night, after both girls had gone to bed, Michael sat in his living room with a cup of tea, staring at the photos on the mantel. Sarah on their wedding day, Emma as a newborn, and now new photos, Zara and Emma at the zoo, all 3 of them at Zara's adoption ceremony. Emma at her first piano lesson, her fingers hesitant on the keys, but her face radiant with joy. His phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez, Emma's interpreter at school. Emma asked to share her story in class tomorrow. She wants to talk about being deaf, about her implant, about Zara. She says she wants other kids to understand that being different is okay, that families come in all shapes. I thought you should know. She's remarkable, Michael. They both are. Michael smiled through tears, because that's what his life had become, a constant oscillation between heartbreak and joy, between grief and gratitude. Sarah was gone, and that would always hurt. Emma would always face challenges that hearing children never would. Zara would always carry scars from years of trauma and loss. But they had each other, and some days, most days, that was more than enough. It was everything. Epilogue. 2 years later, Emma Patterson stood on stage at the Pennsylvania Youth Orchestra's annual recital, her violin tucked under her chin. She was 11 now, tall and confident, her cochlear implant visible behind her ear, a mark of her journey that she wore with pride. In the audience, Michael sat between Zara and his mother, who'd flown in from Oregon for the performance. Zara, now 16 and thriving in high school, squeezed Michael's hand as Emma lifted her bow. The music that filled the auditorium was imperfect. Emma was still learning, still training her brain to translate sound into meaning, sound into melody. But she played with heart, with passion, with the joy of someone who'd been given an impossible gift. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Emma bowed, then looked directly at her family. She set down her violin and signed across the distance. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Michael signed back, "We never will." And as they walked to the car later, Emma chattering excitedly about the performance, while Zara teased her about a slightly flat note, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. This was his family, built not by blood alone, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love that had somehow grown strong enough to bear the weight of everything they'd lost. They stopped for ice cream on the way home, a tradition they'd started years ago. 3 people in a booth meant for 4, but the empty space didn't feel sad anymore. It felt like room to grow. "Next year," Emma announced, chocolate ice cream on her chin, "I want to perform a duet. Zara, you should play piano with me." "I don't know how to play piano," Zara signed, laughing. "So, you'll learn, just like you learned sign language for Marcus, just like you helped me learn to hear." "We figure things out, right, Dad?" Michael looked at his daughters, one he'd been given by birth, one he'd been given by chance, and smiled. "Yeah, baby," he said, "we figure things out." And they did. Every single day, they figured it out together. The end.